The global elites plan to take over the entire economy. I'm going to reveal this to you in 3 simple, fast steps. Step number 1, let's go over how they're going to control the money, or at least try to control the money supply. Why do we start here? This is crucially important. And as a reminder, why controlling the money and the money supply is so critical, editor, let's cut right to the internet. This is a very famous Rothschild quote. "I care not what puppet is placed upon the throne of England to rule the empire on which the sun never sets. The man who controls the British money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply." So what would give them the ability to not only control the money supply, but control how money is spent, to control where money is spent, to control when the money is spent? So what I mean by this is you wouldn't have autonomy over where you spend your own money. It would be the global elite and the central planners. They could simply not allow you to spend money at a specific store, or they could not allow you to buy a specific product, or they could say you're not spending your money fast enough. You need to spend it faster. So again, what would give them this type of control? You guys know where I'm going with this. A central bank digital currency. So let's go through how this works. It's very simple. We're going to go through it briefly, so then we can build on this throughout the rest of the video. Right now, we've got the average Joe. He has a bank account. Deposits are his assets. Those are dollar deposits. Those are liability of the bank. Then the loan that create the deposits in the first place, because remember, most of the dollars that are created in the commercial banking system are a result of lending them into existence. So central bank digital currency, very simple. Instead of Joe banking with XYZ Bank, now he has an account with the Fed. And his dollar deposits, which are his assets, are now a liability of the Federal Reserve. And the loan that was generated in the first place, an asset of the Fed. And you say, George, how is this any different? Why is it a big deal? Because the Fed's balance sheet is infinite, or the Fed's has infinite BS, whichever you prefer. But this means that the Fed can be insolvent. The Fed can have negative equity. And if the Fed can have negative equity, it really doesn't care about a profit or loss. So when it's lending, it has much more control over credit. It has more control over interest rates. In fact, it can individualize monetary policy. Think about it. It could give the average Joe a 0% interest rate, even if it didn't make sense economically, because the Fed doesn't care about getting paid back. And this goes into a social score. That's a completely separate rabbit hole. But the bottom line is that it allows the central bank to individualize monetary policy, and they wouldn't just be able to control the credit with the individuals in the real economy, they'd also be able to control the credit in corporate America. This gives them an incredible amount of influence, which would allow them to really have control over the policy making within the corporations themselves. An example would be what we're seeing with the mandates in the airlines. Most of these CEOs know that there's a high probability they'll have to go back to the government to get another bailout in the future. This is basically the government being their lifeline, or extending them credit like the central bank would have the ability to do in the future if we have a central bank digital currency. So then these corporations basically become a puppet of the government or the central bank. The central bank and the central planners, at the end of the day, would be the ones that are pulling the strings. But the main takeaway is something I kind of glossed over right here. It would give the central planners real-time data of every single transaction that was happening in the real economy in real time. See, now those transactions are between the bank and the average Joe. But there are thousands and thousands of banks in the United States, so it's relatively decentralized. But if all of the entities in the real economy had an account with the Fed, then all the data that's going between the average Joe and the thousands of banks in the real economy would now be going between the average Joe or business XYZ directly to the central planners at the Fed. And if you think the global elite aren't aware of how much power and control this would give them, unfortunately, you're not paying attention. Editor, let's cut to the internet. This is straight from the World Economic Forum's website, and this quote-unquote insight report is titled Central Bank Digital Currency Policymaker Toolkit. We scroll down to their pros and cons, which they title Key Opportunities and Key Challenges. And one of the key opportunities, you'll notice, is potential to improve financial data transmission and reporting to central banks, improve traceability of payments relative to physical cash. So this is the real-time data that would go directly to the central planners and the central banks that I was referring to on the whiteboard. But I also want to point out that under the key challenges, nowhere do they mention anything about this infringing on personal privacy. Basically, what you and I would consider a bug, they consider a feature. Step number 2, control resources through the use of coercion. We have to start by understanding price controls in a free market system give producers an incredible amount of data. This helps us allocate scarce resources with alternative uses very efficiently. To give you an example of how this would work, let's use the scenario we're facing today in Europe, where natural gas prices have gone absolutely ballistic. Now, I don't know exactly what the price is, but for the sake of this example, keep it simple, we'll say that nat gas prices have gone up to $10. Let's assume for a moment in Asia they're $4 and in the United States they're $1. Well, what's going to happen? These producers that are in the United States and in Asia, they're going to send their excess supply to Europe as quickly as they can. Why? Because they know they're going to get a tremendous profit by doing so. So the nat gas goes to Europe, the money goes to the United States. They're happy because they're making more profit. There's the profit incentive that is so vitally important to an economy running efficiently. But then the price of the natural gas in Europe is going to do what? It's going to go down to a level that's far more affordable. If the natural gas in Europe is more affordable, that literally means fewer people freeze to death this winter. And if you think I'm being hyperbolic, I'm not. Gas prices in Europe have gotten so high that in some places, like Germany, they've actually feared that the poor and maybe even some of the middle class won't be able to heat their homes during the winter, and they will therefore be in jeopardy of quite literally freezing to death. This is just one example as to how price signals give us the data we need to allocate resources efficiently. And if we can do that, then we can increase economic growth and the standard of living for everyone in society. Before I move further, I want to give a huge shout out and hat tip to my good friend, Lynn Alden. I got this example from her blog post. You guys have to check it out. It's an incredible post on the entire topic of price signals, and we'll put a link to that in the description below. But don't for a second think the global elite that will try to manage the entire economy don't understand the value of price signals. So the question becomes, how can they control the means of production? How can they take us to their socialist utopia without free market price signals? Well, go ahead and insert artificial intelligence. In step number 1, we are talking about how the central banks, through the central bank digital currency, would have all the data coming in from every single transaction occurring in the real economy in real time. Well, I think they believe that they can layer over artificial intelligence, and the artificial intelligence can give us a top-down type of approach to allocating scarce resources, even better than this bottoms-up approach of free market capitalism. Now, this is not my view. I want to be very clear, but I believe this is most likely their view based on the research and what I've read on their actual website and what I've listened to in their interviews. They are people that believe in central planning. They think there is this chosen few, the intelligentsia, as Thomas Sowell called them, that are just smarter than everyone else in the entire planet. They are the enlightened few, and they need to make decisions for all of us because we're just too stupid to make decisions on our own. They never acknowledge the power of the decentralized approach. They never admit that the power to grow the economy isn't with a select few at the top, but it's with all of the average Joes and Janes at the bottom. As an example, to illustrate my point further, let's go right to the internet and cut to a clip from Klaus Schwab himself.
What kind of world do we want to build? What do we know? What did we learn? I think the world which we want to create with the Great Reset has to be much more resilient, more sustainable, because we know now that the next crisis is already waiting for us around the corner, and it is the climate crisis.
You notice the type of words he's using and how he's describing the future. He's saying things like, we need to build a better future. Well, Klaus can't build anything, nor can the global elite. It's up to the individuals in the real economy to build things on their own, pursuing their own self-interest. This is how the world works. It might be an imperfect system, but it's the best we have. But in their view, they want to build the entire global economy in a way that they deem appropriate, the way they see fit. Why? Because again, they believe that they are the enlightened ones. They believe that they are just far more intelligent than any of us, and therefore they should be entitled to build the world in a way that they think is best. And a central bank digital currency would get them that much closer to achieving this objective. So now let's go back to the whiteboard and think through how this would work if we didn't have price signals. How did the economy operate in communist Russia, as an example, where the central planners like Klaus determined what the price of everything should be? So in this example, Europe is seeing a massive shortage, but the prices aren't going up. They're still at $1 for that barrel of natural gas. In Asia, still $1. United States, $1. So what would incentivize the average Joe, and let's say his Chinese cousin, the average Joe, to produce more natural gas, or actually send the natural gas they have to Europe? They're not getting paid any additional fee. And in fact, they're probably getting less profit than selling it in their local area because they have to pay for shipping back and forth. So why on earth would they do this? You see, there is no profit incentive in this type of economy. So the only way you could get the average Joe and the average Cho to send their excess supply of natural gas to Europe is through coercion. Said another way, at gunpoint. And you can imagine the global elite taking the data received from the central bank digital currency, laying over artificial intelligence, and treating it as though it's written in stone, like they're getting it from some higher power that just cannot be questioned. Remember what we've heard in 2020 and 2021. You've got to abandon critical thinking and just trust the science. Unfortunately, the global elite are the only ones that can tell you what the science actually is. And I think we could see something very similar with the allocation of resources and artificial intelligence. So we got Klaus right here. He's got a gun pointed at the average Joe saying, send Europe natural gas, because that's what artificial intelligence is telling us we should do. He's got the same gun pointed right at the average Joe. And we cannot question artificial intelligence. Therefore, we cannot question the global elite or Klaus. We have to do exactly what they say, very similar to the economic setup they had in communist Russia. My point here is that coercion is the only way to really allocate resources if you don't have the benefit of price signals that was derived from free market capitalism. Now, I know a lot of you right now are probably saying to yourself, okay, George, I get it, but I mean, this is a little over the top here. I don't know that we're going to be moving into this environment with central bank digital currencies, the global elite, artificial intelligence. I mean, my goodness, to pull this off, the global elite would really have to be in bed with the politicians. They'd really have to have an incredible relationship or an incredibly tight relationship that we just don't know about. And I think that's rather unrealistic. Okay, fair enough. My rebuttal to that would be to present to you a video, very recent video, of a young politician in the Netherlands calling out their prime minister for his relationship with none other than Klaus Schwab. Editor, let's cut to the clip.
Is de heer Klaus Schwab, oprichter en voorzitter van het World Economic Forum. En hij heeft ook een boek geschreven met als pakkende titel COVID-19, The Great Reset. En mijn vraag aan de demissionair minister-president is, hoe beoordeelt hij de inhoud van dit boek?
De minister-president.
Ik ken het boek niet, voorzitter. Maar ik zou de heer Vermeijeren willen adviseren om niet al te veel in al die conspiracy-theorieën. Ik kijk ze ook allemaal op YouTube. Ik vind het altijd fascinerend hoe dan uitgelegd wordt dat 9/11 niet heeft plaatsgevonden of dat het allemaal anders zit. Ontzettend knap in elkaar gezet. Maar het is meestal wat het is, een conspiracy-theorie.
De heer Van Meijeren.
Nou, het verbaast mij dat de eerste vraag die ik aan de heer Rutte stel sinds ik beëdigd ben als Kamerlid direct wordt beantwoord. Dank u wel, maar het verbaast mij dat die eerste vraag direct wordt beantwoord met een leugen. Ik heb namelijk een brief in mijn hand, die dateert van 26 november 2020. En dat is een brief van de heer Rutte aan de heer Klaus Schwab, waarin hij de heer Schwab bedankt voor het toezenden van zijn boek. En dit noemt een hoopvolle analyse voor een betere toekomst. Zou de heer Rutte nog even kunnen graven in zijn geheugen? Het is nog geen half jaar geleden, dus ik weet niet hoe lang uw herinneringen actief blijven. Maar waarschijnlijk is dit nog wel ergens op te graven. En mijn eerste vraag opnieuw te beantwoorden en nu eerlijk, alstublieft.
Step number 3, control goods and services. If you read the World Economic Forum's website, or if you listen to what they talk about, not only the World Economic Forum, but the IMF and all of these global elite, they're always talking about the private-public partnership. This is just a fancy way of saying corporatism or technocracy, or just really getting down to the basics. It's economic fascism, which might not be a surprise when you go back and look at Klaus Schwab's history. When was he born? 1938. Where? Germany. What type of economic system did they have? Fascism, technocracy, corporatism, or, in his words, a private-public partnership. But currently, we have millions and millions of small and mid-sized businesses all over the world competing with these megacorporations. They're definitely not under the influence of the global elite, the World Economic Forum, the IMF. So how do you solve that problem if you want to control the means of production, the goods and the services? Well, you can start by crushing those small and mid-sized businesses with all of these regulations. What type of regulations am I referring to? Oh, I don't know. Why don't you force them to go bust by not allowing them to open their doors to customers? Something we saw in 2020 and we're continuing to see in some parts of the world into 2021. I think in the future, they'll do the same thing with the initiative for climate change. I'm not here to say that climate change is or isn't a big deal. What I am here to say is that they don't care about the quality of air. They don't care about the temperature in the entire world going up by 2 degrees. The only thing they care about is gaining that power and that control. And if they have to do that through a vehicle like climate change, they'll be more than willing to do so.
The next crisis is already waiting for us around the corner, and it is the climate crisis.
Also, they'll champion equality and safety. This is for your benefit. If we increase the regulations on businesses, it will benefit society at large. And you may say to yourself, well, George, that sounds like a good idea. Okay, but what you're not thinking through is that these regulations disproportionately affect the small and mid-sized businesses. Why is that? If they have a regulation that comes out, such as minimum wage, well, the Walmarts of the world make enough profit to absorb the cost. The mom and pop shops most likely don't. Another example is if you just increase basic red tape and bureaucracy, this is an additional cost that is easy for the mega corporations to absorb, but it's very rarely that easy for a small and mid-sized business. This is why you see the capitalists that run these mega corporations always out there trying to promote further regulations. And they're trying to team up with the politicians. It's not because they like the regulations. It's because they know this builds a moat around their business. And it makes it almost impossible for the little guy to compete with them. So if we see this progression to fewer and fewer small and mid-sized businesses, where is the demand going to go? It's going to go to the mega corporations. They are going to dominate the global economy in this world if we continue down this path. And there are no certainties, only probabilities. I'm just going over this as a hypothetical on what we could see if they're able to achieve their objectives. So let's go over a very simple example of how this works. And I had to summon all of my artistic ability for this one. So we've got Klaus Schwab right at the top. He is the puppeteer with his little strings. And these strings are attached to the politicians, like Joe Biden and this guy in the Netherlands, Rutte or Root, whatever his name is, the guy that we saw in the video. And they have these sledgehammers that are the regulatory environment. They can increase the regulation and just crush the small and mid-sized businesses. So Klaus is really the puppeteer. These individuals are the puppets. But it's not just the politicians that are under the influence of the global elite. And I'm just using Klaus as a proxy for all of them. It's also the CEOs of these corporations, such as Benioff and potentially Jeff Bezos. Don't know about Jeff Bezos' relationship with Klaus or the global elite, but I know definitively that Benioff is one of their most valued disciples. How do I know this? Just read what he writes in his blog posts. He literally uses the exact same language, has the exact same heroes and the exact same enemies as Klaus Schwab. He's like a Klaus Schwab mini-me. So the global elite control the politicians control and crush the small and mid-sized businesses and their economy. That forces all of the customer demand to the mega corporations, which the global elite control as well. We talked about how they're going to try to control the money supply, scarce resources, and now goods and services. The question is, what is the probability that they will be able to bring this vision to fruition into the future? by, say, 2030. And the good news is I think the probability is getting lower, especially when I see young politicians like that kid in the Netherlands who has absolutely no fear, will stand up to the global elite, the politicians, and call them out. So if all of us stand up with him and peacefully push back against the authoritarians, I think there's a very good chance that we get off this road to serfdom and back on the road to liberty, freedom, and free market capitalism. For more content that'll help you build wealth and thrive in a world of out-of-control central banks and big governments, check out this playlist right here, and I will see you on the next video.